What's up, everybody? Welcome to The Register, your periodical ring up of headlines and metrics relevant to anyone who makes, distributes, and sells stuff. Let's go. Okay, so April 9th. Last time we did this was in February. We were post election. We were post a really nice holiday season and kind of reporting season. And we actually saw a positive balance, a lot of positive headlines in the news. This month, it's going to be different. I'm sitting here after 2 days of the stock market just plummeting and tariffs and just a lot of tough stuff. So let's get into it. What are the headlines? Well, we actually have 4 positive headlines, but as you look at the dates of these, they're all just a few days older. You have some bright spots, right? So Walgreens, you have Ikea and a couple of these fun little niche things, Pop Mark, and there's a story out of downtown Billings. It's like little niches where there's some sparks, there's some things growing, there's people expanding, there's footprints growing and investment, right? But they're small, they're little, they're specific stories, they're specific, pharmacy and IKEA. IKEA is just a monster. Let's not base what we think the market is on what's going on with IKEA. Let's get into the negative ones. And okay, so no surprise, I called it the bear in the room, right? Is that there's new tariffs and everybody's freaking out. It's really going to have a big impact. Commerce Secretary says they're coming despite the market sell-off. Vogue said U.S. fashion brands face an existential threat. Tariffs could be that bad when you're in kind of a low margin segment. So those tariffs, they're going to have direct impact, but there's also like indirect impact. This article I found really interesting. Even if the tariffs happen and then back off or like come and go, or there's like knock-on effects where, if a brand isn't in a market for a little while, or they lose some momentum on some marketing or some things that they're doing, brand loyalty, where customers really thought that was their brand and now they just can't even get access to that brand. Those impacts can be more than just products being more expensive. It can really have long-term knock-on effects. Then we also have things like, we have Walmart like really pushing on their marketing partners, even though sales are very flat. You have, apparel brands in Canada, even though the tariffs aren't specifically impacting them, going like, hey, this is messing with us in all kinds of different ways, where you have the supply chain is a mess and goods that we get, or like supply that we get. And so all kinds of knock-on effects. There's ripples to the tariffs, right? And then we have this article, which is really interesting. It says everybody's just basically staring at Walmart this upcoming earnings call, going like, tell us how to do this. Are we all raising prices? Are we all cutting costs? Are we doing both? Like, what's the playbook? What are the specifics on how we do this? And it's just not a great tone throughout the article of like, man, this is painful, and people are kind of freaking out. There are a few neutral articles that I thought were interesting. So, for example, this market sell-off, it said the market is in a new mode, sell everything American, where they're talking about it's not just stocks, it's also bonds, it's also the dollar. But there are actually a few spots of hope in this article of like, hey, some of the most core fundamental underlying metrics actually aren't decreasing. There's some bright spots there. And then, Brazil showing a few kind of sparks of growth, but also some kind of tighter financial conditions. And then several kind of product launches where just like not the kinds of launches that sound like, hey, we really believe in this market, we're launching something huge. It's more just like, hey, we always got to do promos, we always got to do marketing, here's the next one. When we look into our metrics, some really interesting headlines here. So I looked at the composite PMI, and it was up, and it's deceptive, where you could say, hey, solid expansion, new business, employment are both up. But all the growth was in services. Manufacturing, rough. Input and output prices, rough. Business confidence plummeting. And so, that's not a great headline once you really dive into it on the PMI. And then I spent a little bit of time just kind of nerding out on this really interesting one. I'll just show you the chart here. You see this really diverging pattern where there was this poll about how do people feel. People are really concerned, right? So it was like 76% of consumers worried about prices, 81% worried about small business closures, and 66% worried about, what are tariffs going to do to pricing from Canada, tariffs on Canada, followed by Mexico, and then Europe, and then some others like China didn't even make the list. Like they weren't even on the top, the 60% type of, and I wanted to contrast that. We're really worried about Canada and a little bit worried about Mexico and EU, but when you look at who's actually importing goods, well, EU crushes Canada by a long margin, and even so does Mexico to a certain extent, and China's still beating Canada. And so what's going on? Why are we so worried about tariffs on Canada? I guess they're because they're our buddies. They're good buddies, eh? Weird sentiment. But I mean, the TLDR here, consumers are worried. They're worried about all this stuff. And that doesn't bode well for spending and for how they feel about prices and stuff like that. So on the checkout here, 4 positive, 7 negative. This is our worst since we started doing this series. It's our worst week. A lot of negative, a lot of concern. Stay tuned on our next one. Let's look at how this stock market sell-offs, how does this trend continue? Do we sell off even further? What's the impact to sentiment, to headlines, to retail? And so that's what we'll do in the next edition of the Register, which is your periodical ring up of headlines and metrics relevant to anyone who makes, distributes, and sells stuff.